Well, good morning, everyone. It's been a great morning so far. Thank you for coming. My name is Beth Romansky. I am GKII's US-based program manager. I have the privilege of specializing in the Institute's educational programs. So I'm extremely passionate about the next topic that we're about to hear. We are now delving into a sector that not only connects nations, but also shapes the future of global leadership: higher education. Our panel today will explore key themes shaping internationalization of higher education, which includes international student mobility, joint academic programs for the global workforce, and advancing research capacity through institutional partnerships. In an interconnected world, our key question for today is: how can US India educational collaborations build, enhance, and sustain equitable partnerships that drive quality education, innovative research, and future-ready skills for global competitiveness? To explore these evolving topics, I'm honored to introduce our distinguished panelists. Leah Mason from the International Institute of Education, IIE, an expert in global academic exchange programs and international student mobility trends. Hanan Saab from the Association of American Universities, AAU, who shapes federal education and research policy and institutional international strategy. Dr. Sunil Kumar, president of Tufts University, a leader in US academic institutions with a personal perspective on global engagement in India. Shuchita Sonalika, director and head for North America at CII, who bridges academia and industry, offering insights on upskilling and workforce development. And our chair and speaker is Dr. Rajika Bhandari, a leading voice in international education, co-founder of the South Asia International Education Network, and recipient of NAFSA's inaugural 2025 Hudzik Prize for Sustained Leadership in Higher Education Internationalization. With these experts, we'll aim to illuminate how US-India education collaborations can shape the future of global talent, research, and diplomacy. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists.
Thank you so much, Beth. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge you and all your hard work in really bringing us here today together in this panel. And I'm really honored to be here. Now, I always like to begin with stories, and the story of how India and America have connected through education goes as far back as 1883, when an ambitious young woman named Anandibai Joshi traveled from the state of Maharashtra in India to study at a medical college in Pennsylvania, which today is part of Drexel University's College of Medicine. Now, unfortunately for Anandibai, she could never practice in India because soon after she sailed back, she died. But she was so transformed by her time in the US and within American higher education that she fell very much in love with this country, and her ashes are now in a cemetery in Poughkeepsie along the Hudson Valley in New York, where the inscription reads, "First Brahmin woman to leave India to obtain an education." Now, fast forward from Anandibai's time, thousands of Indian students and scholars have studied at US colleges and universities, forming a back and forth flow of knowledge and talent and people-to-people diplomacy. Many have remained here, like me, and I'm assuming many in this room, and have contributed to this society as immigrants. Others have gone back to India and serve as critical linkages between the US and India. If we think about the current ecosystem of US-India higher education, or the post-secondary relationship, as I was reminded in a conversation with two international students yesterday, where they said, what is this higher education? We're used to using the term post-secondary in India, so we must remember terminology as well. The forces that move it forward are grounded in two key pillars, or one might consider it to be the connective tissue in addition to student mobility. The first is the formation of bilateral initiatives pushed forward by the two governments of India and the US. And these, of course, include flagship programs like the Fulbright Nehru Program, the Humphrey Program, and I'm delighted that there are Fulbright and Humphrey scholars at this event taking place, and I had the opportunity to chat with a few of them yesterday. There's the GYAN initiative of the Indian government, the Global Initiative of Academic Networks, SPARK, which is the Scheme for Promotion of Academic and Research Collaboration, and Vajra, which is the Visiting Advanced Joint Research Faculty Scheme. The second equally important pillar, which we're also going to talk a lot about today, is university partnerships, or the push that comes from individual US and Indian institutions or groups of institutions working together. And there are many excellent examples of this, including the Gupta-Klinsky India Institute itself, which mobilizes staff, faculty, students, and alumni across the university to work with partners in India to improve society through research, education, policy, and practice. Other examples include delegations and task forces organized by the very active nonprofit sector in the space of US-India higher education relations. And that includes ones like the IIE delegation to India, which has now taken a couple of groups of US university leaders to engage with Indian institutions, as well as the Association of American Universities US-India Task Force, which we're going to hear more about later today. A final example within university partnerships includes at least 3 phases of work funded by the US Department of State, including the Partnerships 2020 project, which was implemented by the University of Nebraska some years ago, a project by Miami University, and a more recent project that I've been involved in with the University of Denver, where we worked on building out a whole online course and curriculum to better help Indian and US institutions engage with each other to better understand what the higher education system really looks like on the ground in both countries, what do concepts of internationalization mean, etc. And I'm pleased to share that we have over 300 Indian institutions currently enrolled in the course. A final and new initiative that I would like to share with you is called the South Asia International Education Network, or SouthAsia-IEN, which a colleague from the University of Denver and I co-founded, and that brings together leaders, practitioners, scholars, and entrepreneurs in the US higher education space whose origins and work touch upon the countries of South Asia. We founded SouthAsia-IEN in response to a growing realization that while the South Asian diaspora constitutes one of the fastest growing immigrant groups in the US, and our presence in the US higher education landscape has increased in both visibility and impact, there is no organization or network that taps into the collective professional power of these groups. And I'm really pleased that Jane Shukarsky and Sundar Ramaswamy, who are at this event, were at our launch meeting in DC 2 years ago. Our work in SouthAsia-IEN centers around 4 main areas: peer-to-peer networking, institutional partnerships, educational diplomacy, and finally, mentoring and professional development for the next generation of South Asians. In this way, the Indian diaspora can serve as a strategic bridge between the two countries, especially given the growing presence of Indians on American campuses. Let's consider some trends. We tend to focus, as Indian Americans and in this community, we tend to focus so much on all of the Indian leaders in the corporate sector and the private sector. But what about the higher education sector? Based on some research that I've been involved in, we found that India is the top country of origin of first-generation immigrant leaders of US campuses, 33 and counting. And of course, President Kumar is an example of this group. Another trend is that Asian American first and second generation students are the largest group of immigrants, largest and fastest growing group of immigrant students on American campuses. As we know, increasing numbers of faculty and campus administrators are of Indian origin. And when we think of educational accomplishment, 77% of Indian immigrants who are 25 plus have a bachelor's degree or higher. I started with the importance of students and individual mobility, but I want to bring this full circle to the importance of policy and commitment from the top. Earlier this year, during Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House, he and President Trump issued a US-India joint leaders statement. It was encouraging for the first time, perhaps, to see higher education be mentioned front and center. And it included a mention of student mobility and talent flows, the economic contributions of Indian students and immigrants, higher education partnerships, and US offshore campuses in India, which, as I'm sure many of you have seen the news, where we've seen the very first brick and mortar US campus approved to be set up in Mumbai by the Illinois Institute of Technology, incidentally also headed by a former international student from India, President Raj H. Ambadi. At the India end, the National Education Policy, released in 2020, is promising as it specifically mentions the importance of internationalizing Indian higher education and provides several avenues for doing so. But I also want to acknowledge that all of these positive developments are not without challenges at both ends. Complicated regulations continue to be an issue, as do visa and immigration issues. With this broad framing of the current state of affairs in the US higher education space, I'm going to turn it over to Leah Mason to come and speak with us.
Thank you so much, Rajika. It's so wonderful to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm pleased to present to all of you today. I am the Deputy Director of Research, Evaluation, and Learning at the Institute of International Education, and today what I'm hoping to share with you about India's impact of internationalization of higher education in the United States are some of the trends that we're seeing. So I will first look at trends between India and the US, and I will then talk about some of the global trends that we see. Now, for those of you who may be learning about the Open Doors project for the first time, Open Doors is implemented by the Institute of International Education on behalf of the Department of State, and this collects data on academic mobility to and from the United States. Now, the total number of international students in the United States reached a historic record of 1,126,690 students, with the highest total in Open Doors history and a 7% increase from the previous year. The United States remains the top host of international students worldwide. And for the third year in a row now, the largest group of international students in the United States were graduate students. 502,291 international graduate students studied at U.S. higher education institutions in the 2023-24 academic year, which is an 8% increase. And it's really important to note that this builds on a 21% increase from the last year and 17% increase from the year before. So you can really see that with the red line on the slide. The number of international undergraduates reflected a moderate 1% decline, with a total of 342,875 students. The non-degree international student population decreased by 12% to 38,472, and this represents a stabilization in this group of students who typically travel to the United States for intensive English language programs or for academic exchange. And finally, the number of students staying in the United States to gain practical work experience on optional practical training was at a record high, growing 22% to 242,782 students. Now, the United States continued to be a destination of choice for international students from over 210 places of origin. India, China, and South Korea were the top 3 places of origin in the 2023-24 academic year. And when we expand to the top 25 places of origin, we see that students come to the United States from all world regions. In the 23-24 academic year, when we look closer at students from South and Central Asia, you can see here that 386,260 international students came from this region. This represents a 22% increase from the prior year. And the vast majority of these students, 331,602 students, were from India, a 23% increase. Now, let's take a look at the longer trend of international students from India in the United States. 20 years ago, nearly 80,000 students from India were here in the United States pursuing their academic study at the tertiary level. This figure increased slowly over time, picking up steadily in 2012-2013, and then again in 2017-18. We, of course, can see the dip that represents the COVID-19 pandemic here on the slide, when mobility was in flux, and then you see a steep increase that occurs after that point in time. Now, let's learn a little bit more about the profile of the Indian students who were here in the United States in comparison to the national trend. You can see that while graduate students comprise 45% of all international students, among the Indian student population, nearly 60% are enrolled at the graduate level. This, of course, affects the proportion at all other levels, where fewer Indian students are enrolled at the undergraduate and non-degree levels. We see almost 1/3 of students on optional practical training, which is higher than the national average. In terms of field of study, more than half of all international students are enrolled in STEM majors, followed by 14% in business and management and 8% in the social sciences. In comparison, 3/4 of Indian students are enrolled as STEM majors, 11% in business and management, and 2% in the social sciences. Now, students from India are enrolled in all 50 US states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. The top 5 states hosting students from India are Texas, New York, California, Massachusetts, and Illinois, hosting 41% of all international students who study at institutions in the United States. Now, when we look at how US institutions approach reaching out to international students, data from IIE's Fall 2024 snapshot shows that US institutions are strongly focused on conducting outreach and recruiting students from India. In Fall 2024, 65% of institutions prioritized efforts to recruit undergraduate students from India, and at the graduate level, 81% of institutions focused on Indian student recruitment, far outpacing recruitment in all other places of origin at the graduate level. Now, there we go, sorry. Changing directions, I want to make sure we're also talking about the flow of US students to India. This is very important for us to see what this difference looks like. This is a 20-year trend line of US students who studied abroad to India. And you can see that the pandemic low showed only 16 students in India, while the high was back in 2016-17 with 4,704 students. Where we are today in the 2023-24 academic year, which is our most recent, apologies, for study abroad, our data is 2022-23 academic year. That's the most recently available data for study abroad. And you can see that while we have not reached pre-pandemic levels, we had 1,355 US students who studied in India during that academic year. I want to now step out to the global trends and understand, where does India sit within higher education institutions globally? IIE also administers a program called Project Atlas, which allows us to contextualize the Open Doors data and see how it fits within the global picture of other host countries attracting large numbers of international students. We have 30 partner organizations that are part of the national data collection in their country and share information with us that they have on international students coming to their country using a similar definition to that of Open Doors. So what do we know? We know that 6.9 million international students were reported studying globally by UNESCO Institute for Statistics. And when we look at the two bars along the bottom, you can see what this growth looks like over time from 2014 through 2024. In just one decade, the number of international students has risen by 53%. And while the United States has remained the #1 host destination of international students throughout this period, the remaining top hosts have changed over time. So you can see that Canada, the 7th leading host in 2024, has seen significant growth and is now the 2nd leading host of international students. The United Kingdom, Australia, and France round out the top 5 hosts of international students in 2024. Now let's dig a little bit deeper about the leading sending countries of international students. The increase in the number of Indian students seeking a higher education abroad is evident among the top 3 hosts. Indian students are most heavily concentrated in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, driving the growth in these countries, while rising in much smaller numbers in other host destinations. Of the more than 1 million Indian students who studied abroad, 86% chose one of these 3 destinations. Increases in the number of Indian students have occurred at a time when the number of students from China began to decline globally. Here you can see among the top host destinations of students, the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, that the number of students from China has fallen. And as a result, India has now also surpassed China as the leading sending country of international students. Now, another look at this data in a different way over time, India's climb to the leading sending country of international students results from a rapid surge in the number of students who studied abroad between 2020 and 2024, nearly doubling in this short time frame. Students from India studied at all academic levels, with just under half enrolled at the undergraduate level and slightly more than half enrolled at the graduate level. With an increasing tertiary population, there's room to recruit a greater number of students from India at higher education institutions globally. However, these proportions differed significantly according to host country. So for example, the United States and the United Kingdom, the majority of students, about 80% of Indian students, enrolled at the graduate level in these 2 countries. Many graduate students going to the United States or the United Kingdom had completed their undergraduate studies in India before pursuing study abroad. And in comparison, more than 90% of Indian students are enrolled at the undergraduate level in Canada, where vocational and technical education degree programs are part of the undergraduate tuition model for international students, making them more accessible and affordable. This has also been bolstered by Canada's immigration policies and pathways to employment. This indicates that the population of students going to Canada differs from the population of students interested in studying in the United States and the United Kingdom. And finally, one more factor is at play here. The significant growth in international student population globally really brings up this question: how much capacity does each country have to host international students at their higher education institutions? When we look at the leading host countries on this slide, we see that international students continue to comprise an even greater proportion of the total higher education population in most countries, with Canada at 38% of the higher education student population, Australia at 31%, and the United Kingdom at 27%. In comparison, international students represented only 6% of US higher education institutions' total enrollment in 23-24. The United States has demonstrated continued capacity to host additional international students, while other leading hosts may be more limited by the size of their higher education sector. If you're interested in more of the information specifically about India, you can go to our website to grab the India fact sheet at opendoors.org. opendoorsdata.org, apologies, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leah. Is this on? Great. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, and it really sort of grounds in data the discussion that we're about to have. And I know we're very tight on time, and I know that there's probably samosas and tea outside, but hopefully this discussion is a stimulating one for everyone. So, Hanan, I want to jump right into our conversation. And in 2023, AAU formed the Task Force on Expanding US-India University Partnerships. So tell us more about the task force, what were some of its key recommendations, and also if you could share more about the proposed establishment of the Indo-US Global Challenges Institute.
Sure, thank you so much. I would be delighted to. As you mentioned, this task force was formed in 2023. It was co-chaired by 5 university presidents and chancellors, including Tufts University President Kumar. And it was comprised of 15 senior campus leaders, all experts in their field, including Johns Hopkins University's Dr. Amita Gupta. The task force issued a final report in 2024 with several recommendations. The signature recommendation was really the establishment of joint research institutes focused on key scientific and societal challenges. The idea here is that it would make it easier for students and researchers from each country to travel to each other's, to study, to collaborate, to share and support the development of each other's human capital and physical research infrastructure as well. Those recommendations from the report were developed in consultation with counterparts from leading research institutions and educational institutions in India as well. I'll just tick through some of those top highlights. You mentioned several programs at the top of your remarks. Certainly broadening participation in each of those programs was a key recommendation in order to take full advantage of the government investments in higher education, including funding from philanthropic organizations that can supplement those existing avenues. Among other recommendations were ideas to host Indian researchers at core facilities here in the United States, working to accelerate knowledge transfer from the lab to marketplace, harmonizing research administration procedures. That's certainly a key segment of recommendations from the report. Establishing and disseminating best practices and procedures for sharing data and intellectual property. And as I mentioned, the Joint Institute was really the significant signature milestone piece from that. The idea would be to facilitate collaboration, ensuring that there is ample opportunity to host, convene, support activities such as virtual and in-person workshops, conferences, international faculty and student exchanges, really offering a new platform to enhance capacity, elevate existing efforts, but forge international research collaborations between our two nations at a level not yet seen. So I've been very excited to work with that task force in seeing how we might actualize some of those recommendations. I know a number of individual institutions are working to move the needle on that and really think about grand challenges in a new way using the existing levers we have.
Thank you, Hanan. Let's go to you, President Kumar. Now, as a university president of Indian origin, and you've also played a pivotal role in some of the initiatives that we're talking about today, including right here at the Gupta-Klinsky India Institute, as well as the AAU task force. What inspired you to champion these initiatives, and how do you envision their impact on fostering deeper educational and research collaborations between India and the US?
So I've always served the institution that has paid my salary, and it sounds like an obvious thing, but I'd like to state that for the record. And what I mean by that is, what is the mission of an institution like Johns Hopkins or Tufts? I see it as twofold: educating responsible leaders and doing more than their fair share at addressing some of the world's most pressing problems. You can't really do either of those and sit out India, because you would not be educating responsible leaders if you took a significant portion of humanity and did not A, draw leaders from there, or B, educate people in this country about what's going on there. So for example, at the Fletcher School, which is a school of diplomacy, we have significant contingent from India, including from the Indian Civil Service and the Indian Defense Forces. We get the same from Pakistan. And the whole point of the exercise is our students learn from them, and hopefully they learn from each other. And so you cannot educate responsible leaders without engaging with countries like this. And second, whether it is Amita's infectious diseases work in India or what we are setting up, this came out of the AAU delegation, even though it's not one of the grand challenges, but Tufts and Indian Institute of Science will set up a joint research institute in nutrition. And because Tufts is one of the few schools that has a graduate school of nutrition and a fairly substantial USDA-funded lab. And again, you cannot address, you heard this in the CEA's, the chief economic advisor's talk, that nutrition is in fact one of their important thrusts in India. And for the world to get nutrition right, it's important that India gets nutrition right, and we'll learn from that. And hopefully they'll learn from our researchers, and we would be educating future biomedical researchers in India jointly on the value of nutrition, a field that is understudied in India. And so that's how I see it. Every place I worked, I've set something up in India, simply because I felt I was delivering on my responsibilities to my home institution here in the US.
Thank you for that. And clearly we've heard this morning, and through what I shared, what Leah shared, and certainly all the examples you've given from your tenure at various institutions on how critical that mobility aspect is. So while we have you here, and I know you have to leave soon, we must also acknowledge the current difficult phase that we find ourselves in, because it would be remiss for this panel to not address that. And the US is currently undergoing a difficult phase with international student visas being revoked, though some of that has fortunately been addressed in just the past couple of weeks, including those of Indian students. So my question to you, President Kumar, and especially since you've been such a strong advocate, and I should say one of the few institutional leaders who's had a voice on this issue, what message can we send current and future Indian students about why they should continue to consider the US as a destination and sort of keep up those amazing numbers that we saw in Leah's presentation?
I think I can speak for most of my peers. Let me go out on a limb and say I think I can speak for almost all of my peers when I say we all will defend our mission, our values, and our community, international and domestic. And so given that, I don't think they should fear. And B, they seem to be voting with our feet. Our international enrollments are up.
May I add to that a little? I think from my perspective at IIE also, adding to what President Kumar has shared, really the United States has wonderful institutions with strong reputations that continue to attract students globally here, and it is a place where students want to study. We have more than 4,000 higher education institutions in our country, and that means that a student can find the institution that really fits their academic goals and aspirations. So there's a place for you here at all price points across any part of the United States, any institution type. There's room here for everyone.
Thank you for that, Leah. And I'll just say that there's an immense sense of optimism among students, particularly here at Johns Hopkins. So I was chatting with a couple of them last night, and they feel very, very supported by their institution, and are still very happy and settled here. So thank you for that. Let's move on. And Shuchita, I want to come to you. I think there's a tendency that when we think about US-India partnerships, or at least from where I sit, I see this almost this bias where there's almost a disproportionate focus on industry and business ties, yet higher education has really been the conduit for really forging a lot of these relationships. So I'd like to ask you, what do you see as the role of higher education, and how can industry and the higher education sector, both in the US and India, work together to advance partnerships between the two countries? And also share with us what the Confederation of Indian Industries is doing in this space.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, huge pleasure to be here. Thank you to Johns Hopkins for inviting me, and great to be on this panel. Let me answer that in two parts. One, sort of what is CII doing in India? CII is the Confederation of Indian Industry, as India's largest premier industry association in India. Our role is really to look at building global competitiveness for Indian industry. And where we come into this conversation is really to see how educational outcomes can be more closely aligned with industry needs at any particular time. So let me go back to a couple of years ago when we hosted when India hosted the G20. CII was the secretariat for the business track of the G20, and within the B20 we had a task force on the future of work, mobility and skilling, where we made a few broad recommendations, and one of those was mapping future job roles to global standards. Another one was building qualification equivalency, so a skill that's acquired in India is as relevant and as recognized in any other country, and vice versa, frankly. And also building smoother mobility frameworks, which we've all been talking about. And now in India, what we see is something very unique that's happening. In India's National Education Policy of 2020, India now has opened a new space for industry engagement. Industry is sitting at the higher education table. And basically, CII, as an industry body, has now the authority to grant certification, national level certifications for industry aligned courses, and given the responsibility to introduce more industry aligned courses across all India Council on Technical Education universities and colleges across the country. And that's going to see a different kind of transformation at a scale and impact that we haven't seen before. So for us, it's all about closer alignment between workforce needs and the curriculum that's coming out. And frankly, I feel that who is catching up with each other is really the tussle here. The kind of technological advancements in business is evolving at such a rapid pace that I really feel higher education and industry should be more kind of step in step working together to advance these things. One more point I'll make about what Indian companies are doing in the US, because what's happening here is that, when we talk about trade and investment flows between our countries, we see that Indian investment in the US has consistently been on the rise. We do a flagship survey called Indian Roots, American Soil, and we see that 160 Indian companies in the US have collectively invested over $40 billion in the US and created some 425,000 jobs across 50 states in the US. And with that, what's happening is that we're looking at, as these companies are expanding, as they're going into more tier 2, tier 3 cities in more remote locations, the gaps in STEM talent and the gaps in those sort of more remote locations in finding talent is becoming more visible. And therefore, these companies, Indian companies in the US now, are taking on the responsibility to create training programs in association with local US universities to create more STEM training programs and also more programs which go beyond just guest lectures. They're introducing internships, they're introducing more hands-on learning, where they're introducing students to engage in real-world business challenges and more innovation-based projects. So I think there's a lot of creativity that we can use here to build a closer alignment between industry partnerships and university.
Thank you. And we heard sort of a similar message reiterated at the conclusion of the previous panel as well, sort of the focus, the important focus on skills development. So thank you for that. Leah, I want to come to you, sort of continuing in this vein of what's happening on the ground. And as we know, the work of US-India higher education collaboration needs to occur both at the US end and the India end with momentum at both ends. Can you share with us very quickly what IIE's India office is doing in this space? And it just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And how is it furthering this work on the ground?
Yeah, so we were really excited to celebrate the 20th anniversary of our office in New Delhi. And the office there is very actively engaged. We recognize that higher education can be a very powerful bridge in the US-India relationship, and that it's not just about the degrees. It's really about that long-term collaboration, innovation, and I think as President Kumar mentioned, those shared values also. And so they are looking at ways to support partnerships. IIE last year led a delegation of 17 institutions, US institutions to India to ensure that they had opportunities to meet with higher education leaders as well as industry and government leaders to explore opportunities for partnerships. And these partnerships are really intended to help build that pipeline of talent, right? Similar to what Shuchita was also saying, you know, building those relationships in industry with tech, with health, with sustainability. In the last panel, I heard AI as well, which often leads to joint research collaborations for student and faculty to then exchange and go back and forth between both countries, and even start up some new ecosystems that can really benefit cross-border collaboration and knowledge. So I think that delegation, which is a 2-year program for the institutions that are participating, is a really powerful first step there. We're also seeing a global thought leadership series coming out of that from institutions that participated. And IIE is really engaging with US institutions to help them navigate in India and build those partnerships through MOUs, through partner receptions and opportunities to meet one another.
Thank you so much. I know we're almost out of time, but I want to end on sort of a rapid round, and maybe Shuchita, we'll start with you all the way at the end. If you all could take a very, very quick minute to talk about why US and India now, why is now the opportunity to move higher ed relationships forward, and what do you see as one challenge that needs to be overcome in order to succeed? So we'll start with you and whatever you want to share.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Thank you. Really good question. I think you know you were talking about that there's been a mention of higher education in the U.S.-India joint leader statement when Prime Minister Modi was here in the U.S. earlier this year. I want to extract that point a little bit further and say that you know higher education, we should not be looking at it just as an academic pursuit. We should not be looking at it in a silo or as a separate sector of its own. Right? I feel that higher education needs to be this sort of completely cross-sector, spread across every aspect of the relationship in the bilateral space. So for instance, US-India have launched this initiative called TRUST, and kudos to the person who came up with this acronym, because it stands for Transforming the Relationship Using Strategic Technology, right? And this is an initiative that looks at artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, energy, space, et cetera, and while the conversation there is between government and industry right now, I feel there is so much scope for higher education sector to come in here and guide research forward and propel the partnerships forward in all of these emerging and critical technology areas, that we should really look at how we can build those really cross-sector, cross-collaborative partnerships in this space.
Thank you. President Kumar?
So if the operative question there is why now, I think it's precisely because it looks difficult. To give in to the moment, to go back into our shells, to take a unilateral view of the world will not serve any country well, and most certainly not a country like the United States. And so my opinion is this is the time for this country to engage even more forcefully with the rest of the world. I may be in the minority here, but.
I would second all of that and just add, the rich talent in both nations is really key to advancing innovation, to new discoveries. We're really in an exciting place with science and technology, just sort of the opportunity to advance new innovations and discover new opportunities. So I think, just advancing the bounds of science, pushing the bounds of science is a worldwide effort, but our nations share a deep commitment, and I think we will only see enhanced research collaboration.
I'm going to second, third, fourth, all that, and just say that, now is the time, right? When universities and industry can partner together across both countries, as others have said, we can really prepare ourselves to be future ready so that regardless of what comes to us, the relationships have been established. I love that acronym, TRUST. I'm going to remember that. I think there's some great things there. But we need to be future ready and to have future ready partnerships that can stand the test of time, can stand the test of economics, and are really focused on those deeper people-to-people ties that help us move forward.
Thank you so much. And I'm told we have a minute for a question or comment.
Well, I think this has been a fascinating session. I mean, all of them have been, but I have one observation and one question. One observation is I was really impressed by the data that was shared as to why the rise of Canada versus US. Is it because of the economics of what it costs a lot less or easier immigration? I think that's just a question. And the second one is a very important one. I mean, clearly the Indian students who come here, including myself who came here, was for the graduate studies and the name of the universities and the research focus and innovation that was there. With what we are seeing today in terms of cutbacks, in terms of funding for research and all of that for the major universities that have really been leaders in the past, how will that, you think, transform itself in less interest between the difficulty of immigration and their reputation being tarnished a little bit?
Thank you for that. President Kumar, I know you have to leave soon, so I'm going to ask you if you have a quick response to that before I go to anyone else.
So on the Canada one, I think you're right. I think it's the cost, and as well as the nature of education, where the liberal arts undergraduate education that many of us provide, Hopkins and Tufts included, is expensive and is not accessible to a significant portion of India. So that I think is one reason. On the second one, I think this is in a way, I'm sounding Panglossian, but I like Candide. It's a short book, so recommend it. But it's not bad that research only gets done in the U.S. Or no longer only gets done in the US. For example, our infectious diseases unit is trying to partner with ASEAN countries because for them, they are very interested in multi-drug resistant TB, which is one of the areas of focus for us. And it's okay for us to actually be working with them, being funded by them, because this does not jeopardize national security in any way for this country. It doesn't jeopardize national competitiveness. By working with another country and learning from them, we make this country stronger. So it's okay to be pushed out a little. I'm not saying the cuts are okay. What I'm saying is we can still operate with this, right? We just have to change our monolithic model of we are a destination, you should come to us. And we have to become more adept and agile, which may serve us well even when the funding environment changes. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to say?
Yes, I can speak to the change in Canada is quite different from the US, right? We are seeing undergraduate Indian students enrolling in Canada in those vocational and technical education programs. Canada also has set up immigration pathways that offered fast tracks and opportunities for post-graduation work opportunities that were very appealing to students from India. In comparison, the United States, the students who are coming here are enrolled at the graduate level. And they are taking advantage, of course, of the optional practical training, the post-graduation work opportunity here in the US. But I think the immigration pathway in Canada sets it apart in that post-graduation work opportunity. So that's one of the key differences between those two groups.
And I'll just perhaps to round that out even further, if we honestly, I call it a game of numbers. If we look historically at international student trends between the big fours, with Anglophone countries, the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK, it's invariably, the ebb and flow is invariably tied to immigration policy. And so the same has happened in Canada now, that ever since they realize they're getting so oversaturated, it's a small country with a small higher education sector. Over the past year or so, they've pulled back. And then we see those same dips even for the UK, and now perhaps the US is in that phase. So really, that's what that flow of students looks like. I know we're out of time, and I appreciate everyone's patience. We would have liked a longer Q&A, but hopefully you got a lot out of this discussion. I want to thank our wonderful panelists and to all of you for staying with us for this discussion. I think the takeaway here is there are challenges, yet there's a lot of optimism in continuing to move this relationship forward between the US and India through the portal of our universities, and perhaps now is more important than ever for all the reasons that you heard. So thank you very much.